I heard my daughter crying to a lawyer, not in grief, but in greed. She was faking my death, forging my certificate just to steal my house. My own flesh and blood, burying me while I was still breathing. So I disappeared, hid in a quiet village, watched from the shadows as they celebrated my funeral and sold off my land. But one day, I walked into that courtroom alive, and the scream she let out, that was the sound of karma hitting bone. Before we dive into the story that still gives me chills, please subscribe to Justice Tales and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of what happened next. My name is Frank Morrison, and at 78 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. Dead wrong, you might say. But we'll get to that. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my world cracked open like an egg. I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my late wife Eleanor had made pancakes every Sunday for 43 years. Sipping coffee from her favorite mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle that she'd refused to throw away because it had character. The house was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. My daughter Sarah hadn't visited in 3 weeks, which wasn't unusual anymore. Ever since Eleanor passed 2 years ago, Sarah's visits had become strategic, always timed around holidays, birthdays, or whenever she needed something. Usually money. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way she'd started asking about my will during Eleanor's funeral reception, how she'd begun dropping hints about retirement homes, assisted living, places where someone my age might be more comfortable. The sudden interest in my property taxes, my insurance policies, my banking arrangements, but I was grieving, lonely. And Sarah was all the family I had left. The Morrison property sat on 12 acres of prime land just outside Bend, Oregon. Eleanor and I had bought it in 1967 for 8-0. Back when the whole area was nothing but pine trees and possibility. We'd built our house with our own hands, board by board, dream by dream. Watched Bend grow from a sleepy logging town into one of the most desirable places to live in the Pacific Northwest. By 2019, our little piece of heaven was worth close to $2.8 million. I knew Sarah knew this. Hell, she'd probably looked it up online more times than I cared to count. Her husband, Derek, certainly had. Derek, the failed real estate developer who saw dollar signs every time he looked at our land. Derek, who'd been pushing Sarah to convince me to sell for the past 5 years. But I wasn't ready to sell. This place held every memory Eleanor and I had built together. The corner where we'd planted our first garden, the oak tree where we'd buried 3 generations of dogs, the bedroom where we'd whispered our dreams and fears through 4 decades of marriage. This wasn't just property to me, it was a lifetime. I finished my coffee and walked out to check the mailbox, my daily ritual. The October air was crisp, tinged with the promise of winter. Pine needles crunched under my feet as I made my way down the gravel drive. The same path Eleanor and I had walked together thousands of times. The mailbox was full of the usual stuff. Bills, advertisements, a letter from my insurance company about renewing my policy. Nothing that required immediate attention. I was sorting through it when I heard voices coming from the side of the house. Sarah's voice. Hushed, urgent, but unmistakably hers. She was supposed to be at work. Sarah managed a small accounting firm in town, kept regular hours, rarely took time off during the week. What was she doing here on a Tuesday morning? I moved closer to the sound, staying hidden behind the old maple tree that Eleanor had planted the year Sarah was born. The same tree Sarah used to climb as a little girl, back when she'd race to hug my legs every time I came home from work. Getting worse every day? She was saying into her phone. Last week he forgot to turn off the stove. Yesterday I found him talking to my mother's picture like she was still alive. My blood ran cold. I wasn't forgetting anything. My mind was sharp as ever. And yes, I talk to Eleanor's picture sometimes, but that wasn't dementia, that was grief. No, he doesn't have any other family, no siblings, no cousins. It's just me. Sarah's voice was getting clearer as she moved around to the back patio, probably thinking I was still inside. The thing is, Robert, I need to move fast on this. He's not going to live much longer, and I can't wait for probate to drag on for months. Robert. That had to be Robert Chin, the lawyer Derek played golf with. The one who specialized in estate planning and had a reputation for creative solutions. What do you mean? How much longer? Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm thinking weeks, maybe a month. You know how these things go with people his age. A fall, a heart attack, pneumonia. It happens fast. I pressed myself closer to the tree, my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be what it sounded like. My own daughter wouldn't. The property's worth at least 2.8. Maybe 3 million if we get the right buyer. Derek's already been talking to developers. There's this company from California that wants to build luxury condos, those high-end mountain retreats for rich people from Portland and Seattle, luxury condos. On the land where Eleanor and I had planned to be buried. On the soil where we'd grown tomatoes and raised our daughter and built a life that meant everything to us. Right. So if he passes, before we can get the will updated, everything goes into probate, and that could take forever. But if we can establish that he's mentally incompetent now while he's still alive, then I can get power of attorney and handle everything myself. Power of attorney. The legal authority to make decisions about my life, my property, my everything. Based on lies about my mental state, what's the timeline on something like that? She continued. Because honestly, Robert, I don't think he's got long. He's been so weak lately, so confused. It's really sad to watch. Weak. Confused. I'd climbed a ladder to clean my gutters just last weekend. I'd balanced my checkbook to the penny, fixed my neighbor's lawnmower, and read 3 books this month. But apparently, in Sarah's version of reality, I was a doddering old fool on death's door. Okay, so we filed the competency petition this week. Get Dr. Martinez to sign off on the evaluation. He's always been flexible about these things, especially for family members who are just trying to do the right thing. Dr. Martinez. My family doctor for the past 15 years. A man I trusted with my health, my concerns, my fears about growing old without Eleanor. He was going to lie about my mental state for Sarah's convenience? And then once I have power of attorney, I can make the medical decisions too, right? I mean, if he takes a turn for the worse, if he needs intensive care, I can decide what's appropriate for someone his age. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just planning to steal my property. She was planning to decide when and how I died. No, Derek doesn't need to be involved directly. The less he knows about the specifics, the better. This is family business, I'm just a daughter trying to take care of her aging father. I closed my eyes, leaning against Eleanor's tree for support. The bark was rough against my palm, real and solid in a world that had suddenly become a nightmare. Perfect. So we'll meet Thursday morning to go over the paperwork. And Robert, this stays between us, right? I don't want anyone thinking I'm some kind of monster. This is about protecting him, making sure he doesn't suffer unnecessarily. Protecting me by lying about my mental health, stealing my property, and potentially deciding when I should die. The kind of protection that would make the mafia blush. I heard her footsteps moving back toward the front of the house, probably heading to her car. I stayed hidden behind the maple tree until I heard her engine start, then watched through the branches as she drove away, talking on her phone again, probably to Derek, planning their future on my grave. When her taillights disappeared around the bend, I walked slowly back to the house, my legs suddenly feeling every one of my 78 years. But my mind was crystal clear. One found done N.O. I sat back down at my kitchen table, still holding the mail I'd forgotten I was carrying. Among the bills and advertisements was that letter from my insurance company. A routine notice about my life insurance policy, the one Eleanor and I had taken out decades ago to make sure Sarah would be taken care of when we were gone. The policy that would pay her $500,000 when I died. Combined with the property, she was looking at nearly $3.5 million. Enough to set her and Derek up for life. Enough to make a daughter forget that her father was still breathing. I opened Eleanor's address book, the one she'd kept meticulously updated for 40 years, and found the number for my old friend Jimmy Castellanos. Jimmy and I had served together in Vietnam, stayed in touch through marriages, kids, careers, everything life had thrown at us. He'd retired to a little town called Paisley, about 2 hours south of Bend, population 247, the kind of place where a man could disappear if he needed to. The kind of place where a dead man could figure out how to come back to life. I picked up the phone and dialed Jimmy's number. It rang 3 times before his familiar, gravelly voice answered. Jimmy, it's Frank Morrison. I need a favor, and it's going to sound crazy. Frank, good to hear from you, buddy. What kind of favor are we talking about? I looked around my kitchen at E. Frank, good to hear from you, buddy. What kind of favor are we talking about? I looked around my kitchen at Eleanor's mug, at the pictures on the refrigerator, at the life I was about to leave behind. I need to die, Jimmy, and then I need to figure out how to live with what comes next. The competency hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. I knew this because Sarah called me that Wednesday evening, her voice dripping with false concern and manufactured sadness. Dad, I've been so worried about you, she said, and I had to grip the phone tighter to keep from hanging up on her. Doctor Martinez thinks it might be a good idea for you to talk to someone, just to make sure you're processing everything okay after Mom's death. Processing everything okay, as if grief had an expiration date, a proper timeline that I was apparently failing to follow. What kind of someone? I asked, playing along with her charade. Just a specialist. Someone who works with people our age who are dealing with transitions, loss, confusion, memory issues. It's nothing to be embarrassed about, Dad. It happens to everyone eventually. Memory issues. There it was. The lie she'd built her whole scheme around. The foundation of her betrayal, constructed from nothing but greed and impatience. When would this be? I asked. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock at the courthouse downtown. I'll pick you up around 9:30, okay? We'll get through this together. The courthouse. Not a doctor's office, not a counselor's practice. The courthouse, where judges decided whether people were competent to manage their own lives. That seems sudden, I said. I know, but Dr. Martinez pulled some strings. He's concerned about you, Dad. We all are. Yesterday, when I was there, you seemed so distant, like you weren't really present. Yesterday, when I'd been hiding behind Eleanor's tree, listening to her plan my legal and possibly physical death, when I'd been deciding whether to trust my own daughter or believe the evidence of my own ears. Distant. Yeah, I'd been distant, all right. Okay, sweetheart, I said, the endearment tasting like ash in my mouth. I'll be ready. Good. And Dad, don't worry about anything. I'm going to take care of everything from now on. You won't have to stress about bills or property taxes or any of that complicated stuff anymore. Complicated stuff. Like having control over my own life and decisions. After I hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the family photos scattered across Eleanor's antique side table. Sarah at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a fish we'd caught together at Wickiup Reservoir. Sarah at 16, rolling her eyes at the camera but smiling anyway. Her arm around Eleanor at her high school graduation. Sarah at 25, radiant in her wedding dress. Derek beaming beside her like he'd won the lottery. Maybe he had. I picked up the phone again and called Jimmy. It's happening tomorrow, I said without preamble. The hearing's at 10. You sure about this plan, Frank? Once you disappear, there's no going back. Not for a while anyway. I'm sure. Sarah's already decided I'm dead. I'm just going to make it official. All right then. I'll be there at 6 in the morning. Pack light, just the essentials. And Frank? Yeah? This is gonna hurt like hell for a while. Watching people you love destroy your memory while you can't fight back. You ready for that? I looked around my living room. At 40 years of memories built with Eleanor. At the life Sarah was planning to auction off to the highest bidder. I'm ready. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I walked through my house room by room, touching things, remembering. Eleanor's piano, where she'd played Christmas carols every December. The dining room table where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties and homework sessions with Sarah. The bedroom where Eleanor had died in my arms 18 months ago. Her final words, a whispered promise that we'd find each other again somehow. In my office, I pulled out my strongbox and gathered the documents I'd need. Birth certificate, social security card, passport, bank account information. Life insurance policy. I left copies of everything in obvious places where Sarah would find them easily. I wanted her to believe she'd won completely. I packed a single suitcase with clothes, toiletries, medications, and a few photographs. Everything else would stay behind. Part of the fiction that Frank Morrison had simply vanished, without planning, without preparation, without awareness of what was being done to him. At 5:45 a.m., I heard Jimmy's truck crunching up my gravel driveway. I took one last look around the kitchen, drank one final cup of coffee from Eleanor's mug, and locked the door behind me. You look like hell, Jimmy said as I climbed into his passenger seat. Feel worse than I look, I admitted. Let's get out of here before I change my mind. As we drove through Bend in the pre-dawn darkness, I watched my town scroll past the windows like scenes from someone else's life. The diner where Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast every Sunday, the hardware store where I'd bought supplies for 40 years of home improvement projects, the library where Eleanor had volunteered, reading to children every Tuesday afternoon until she got too sick to continue, all of it about to become part of Sarah's inheritance. So what's the plan once we get to Paisley? I asked Jimmy. My neighbor Pete died last month. Heart attack. His cabin's been sitting empty. His kids live back east. Haven't decided what to do with it yet. You can stay there as long as you need to. It's got electricity, running water, phone line if you need it. What about identification? Banking? I can't exactly walk into Wells Fargo as Frank Morrison, if Frank Morrison is supposed to be dead. Jimmy grinned. The same reckless smile I remembered from our Army days. You let me worry about that. I've got a friend who used to work for the state, knows how to make paperwork disappear, create new paperwork, that kind of thing. Cost you $5,000, but by next week you'll be somebody else entirely. $5,000. A fortune to some people, pocket change compared to what Sarah was stealing. And then you wait, watch, let them hang themselves with their own rope. Jimmy's expression turned serious. But Frank, you gotta be patient. This kind of long game, it takes months, maybe a year. You sure you can handle watching them celebrate your death? I thought about Sarah's voice on the phone yesterday. So caring, so concerned, so full of lies. I can handle it. We drove in silence for the next hour, watching the sun come up over the Cascade Mountains. By the time we reached Paisley, it was 8:30 a.m. In 90 minutes, Sarah would arrive at my house to find me gone. In 2 hours, she'd be sitting in a courthouse trying to convince a judge that her missing father was mentally incompetent. The cabin Jimmy showed me was small but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace, the kind of place where a man could think, plan, and wait for justice to find its way home. There's a landline in the kitchen, Jimmy said, showing me around. Numbers unlisted, but it works fine. You can call out, but nobody can trace calls back here. Perfect. And Frank? The nearest neighbor's about half a mile away. Older couple, keeps to themselves. They won't ask questions as long as you don't cause trouble. I set my suitcase down on the bed and looked out the window. Pine trees stretched to the horizon, unbroken except for the occasional dirt road or clearing. The kind of wilderness where a man could disappear completely, where a dead man could learn how to haunt the living. At exactly 10:15 a.m., I called the Deschutes County Courthouse from the cabin's kitchen phone. "I'd like to speak to someone about a competency hearing scheduled this morning," I told the clerk, who answered. "Frank Morrison case. Are you family? I am a concerned friend. I was supposed to be a character witness, but I can't make it to the courthouse today. I wanted to know if the hearing was still happening. Let me check. Yes, the Morrison hearing is still on the docket. Started about 10 minutes ago. Thank you." I hung up and sat back in Pete's old recliner, imagining Sarah in that courtroom right now, probably worried, confused, wondering where I was, maybe telling the judge that my absence proved her point about my mental state, maybe spinning my disappearance into more evidence that I couldn't take care of myself. By noon, she'd have power of attorney over my life. By evening, she'd be calling real estate agents. And somewhere in a cabin in Paisley, a dead man would be planning his resurrection.